Hello, this is our lecture number 23, and this is on child development and a little bit of history, and certainly some controversy in this area. So we're entering, a whole new specialization in psychology that has to do with the development of behavior. And just a little reminder, please do keep up with your reading, keep up with those um, videos that I have listed for you on the syllabus. It's good to have those all read and watched prior to the time that you actually listen to this lecture and prior to the time that we have a Zoom meeting. So again, just a little reminder about that as we go along. So let's get into this really interesting area by taking a look at some history, some definition, and so on. So very controversial issue here. What is more important in successful child development? Is it really about genes? Genes that have been contributed to you by your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents? Or instead, is it having, you know, uh, hyperparents who are exposing you to all kinds of interesting and new and enriched experiences and environments? So nurture. So again, we invariably in so many areas of psychology, we come back to that fundamental question of nature and nurture. Uh, a little, again, little interesting background here in terms of history and nature nurture. Our early philosophers, European philosophers, John Locke believed that everything is environment, that we have no innate ideas. We start out as a blank slate. Nurture is everything. Nature is absolutely nothing. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, on the other hand, very different outlook. Believed in what we would call the innate goodness of man, that everything is pre-wired. So in other words, genes are everything, nature is everything. So again, this is the fundamental philosophical controversy that is occurring during this period of time. Um, a very interesting story, one that perhaps you've already heard about or even read about, and it's the Wild Boy of Aveyron. And this indeed is a fascinating story. This individual, this boy, was captured in France in 1800. He was estimated at the time that he was captured. Again, he had been living in the wild in a wooded area in Aveyron, France. They estimated that he was about 10 years of age when he was captured. And his desires were really very basic. He really didn't go beyond physical needs of eating, for example, and staying under a shelter. He couldn't speak. He couldn't understand human language. He liked raw food, and whenever they tried to put clothing on him, at least according to the reports at this time, he simply would rip off that clothing. So, this is a very interesting situation in terms of this boy's background. And along comes a physician by the name of Jean Itard. And Jean Itard and his wife try to civilize this boy, Victor. They try to teach him language. They try to teach him how to communicate. They spend, he and his wife spend an enormous amount of time with him, and they did have some success. But in spite of that success, they never really progressed beyond a very simple level. And indeed, some scientists, when they go back and they take a look at some of Itard's records, they really believe that Victor was an autistic child. Again, we don't have any definitive proof of that at all, but scientists at the time really believed that Itard's failure to go beyond this rudimentary level was really confirmed Rousseau's idea that nature is everything, and indeed this was touted as nature being much more important than nurture. So again, very interesting story in terms of this history about nature and nurture in development. So let's try to define development, and I think that the definition, the one that I think is best here, is that it's everything that we go through, all the different processes that we go through. And again, those developmental changes that we go through, they can be new qualities, new abilities, new traits. And indeed, when we take a look at development and the whole field of developmental psychology, what we do is we divide it up into what we call qualitative changes and quantitative changes. And I want to make sure that everybody understands the nature, of the two. So qualitative changes, developmental changes, this is everything that's related to experience. This is everything that's related to what we learn as we grow up. And again, to give you examples, consider your social behavior as you mature, when you go in your early years on up to, kindergarten, and then ultimately elementary school and middle school and high school, and ultimately on to college. You're changing in terms of your social behavior. Your social behavior initially, in many cases, is largely same sex. Then as you meet more individuals, as you enter into those schooling years, then it changes from same sex to opposite sex affiliations begin to emerge more during the middle school and high school years. So again, these are qualitative changes. These are things that are related to experience. These are the things that are related to the social behavior that emerges, as you develop. So again, these are qualitative changes, and indeed, psychology is very interested in those kinds of qualitative changes. Quantitative changes are, on the other hand, are things that we also refer to as maturational changes, meaning that heredity sets these things in motion, that nature sets these things in motion, and that they're really related to physical growth. So to give you some examples, as you see here, this young girl climbing a rope. Now, this is not something that you could do maybe in your real early years, maybe when you're in elementary school. But then as you get, older, and your muscles begin to develop, and your skeletal system begins to develop, this is something that you can do. Learning to ride a bicycle, where you start out maybe with a tricycle, then a bicycle with training wheels, and the training wheels are removed again as you mature. Again, another good example of these quantitative or maturational changes. Water skiing, another wonderful example of a change that something that you can't really do when you're real young, but then as you get older, you get more adept at it. Same as, skiing, downhill skiing in the wintertime. But let's also include in that changes that occur in terms of different tastes that you have for a variety of different foods. Indeed, these are things that we call maturational or quantitative changes. And certainly, psychologists are interested in both these things. They're interested in both qualitative changes and quantitative changes. So some fundamental questions then about development, especially early development. We'll start out with that. What kinds of abilities are evident in newborns and infants? Are they abilities that are a lot more sophisticated than we ever thought possible, or are they simply just very, very rudimentary? Can infants engage as they get older, for example, in moral reasoning? Can they determine right from wrong? Can they determine good from evil? Are young children hardwired for being selfish, for being racist, for being biased? These are really interesting questions, and just some of the questions really that psychologists in the area of developmental psychology have been very concerned with, and indeed these are some of the things that we will take a look at. So when we go to the newborn and we begin to explore what a newborn is capable of, if you take a look at William James, again, the father of American psychology, and these are two quotes from him. He says, "An infant is totally confused and helpless organism." And he says also, "Babies are assailed on all sides by overwhelming sensations. It is one great blooming, buzzing confusion." So that would lead you to believe that at this time anyway, and again, we're talking about 1900, William James, he's saying that babies really aren't capable of very much at all. Newborns really aren't capable of very much at all. John Watson, a little later on, 1920, again, another interesting quote. Babies, they're a lively, squirming bit of flesh capable of making only a few simple responses. And again, this is in 1920. And then, take a look at medical textbooks. Not that long ago, 1964, babies can't feel pain. Newborns can't focus their eyes or respond to sounds. Again, the implication here is that newborns really can't do all that much. But that research really, or those conclusions really were wrong about the limited capabilities of newborns. And if we just take a look at a few things, you can really see the sophistication that is available in newborns. Newborns can do all sorts of amazing things. Their eyes can turn to voices. Their hands can reach out to another human being. Their head can turn to follow a face. This is all pretty sophisticated programming that is taking place in terms of the ability of newborns to engage in these kinds of behaviors. They have likes and dislikes. They don't like the taste of vanilla. Excuse me, they love the taste of vanilla, and it almost looks like they have a smile or a pleasing look on their face when they taste it. Same holds true with bananas, but if you give them something that tastes like shrimp, they recoil. They don't like it. It's not good tasting to them. Newborns prefer female voices over male voices. Newborns are lulled by a heartbeat. And indeed, newborns can recognize their mother's voice. That indeed is a very sophisticated kind of behavioral attribute that's occurring at a relatively early age. So when we take a look at what developmental psychologists were doing at this time in trying to establish that newborns have certain preferences and certain attractions, the individual who really contributed an enormous amount to this was the psychologist Robert Fonts. And he started a new tradition in psychology in which he took a look at infants' preferences for looking at something that was new. And he believed that this represented silent speech. In other words, if an infant, if a baby looks at something longer, looks at an object longer than another object, that means something, and that must mean that they show a preference for it. And again, this was Fonts was the first one to really do this, and his work is considered to be so important in terms of the history of developmental psychology. So babies prefer objects that have contours versus those that are plain. This is a contoured object. They much prefer to look at this versus this. What we also know is that they prefer complex objects like the one that you see here over relatively simple objects like what you see here. Again, they look at this longer than they look at this. They prefer whole faces versus parts of faces that are jumbled up. Again, we talked a little bit about Fonts' research earlier when we were taking a look at face recognition. So again, they don't prefer this anywhere near as much as this. So again, this gives you, a little bit of background, I think, into this whole area of developmental psychology and nature nurture and so on, and some of the early history. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the controversy in this area and begin to explore it in our next lecture.